of our system, you must not follow the dictionary. Don't pronounce it GNU. If you pronounce it GNU, you'll get people confused. You see, we've been developing it for 25 years now, and we've been using a variant of it for 16 years, so it's not new anymore. But it still is GNU. And it will always be GNU, despite the people who mispronounce it as Linux. I'm told that there is a, quote, Linux user group, unquote, here in Mysore. That is propagating a mistake, because this system is not Linux, and it was never Linux. Ever since I announced the plan in 1983, this system is the GNU system. And the reason some people think it's Linux is just a mistake that started in 1992 and that other people have been imitating ever since then. But here's what happened. During the 1980s, our task as the developers of the GNU system was to either find or develop every one of the components we needed to have a complete free operating system, similar to Unix. Well, in 1990, we had all the necessary components except one. One major essential component was still missing. That was the kernel, which is the component that allocates the machine's resources to all the programs you run. Well, in 1990, therefore, the Free Software Foundation hired somebody to write our kernel. I chose the design, but I didn't write the software. Now, I chose a design which I thought would enable us to get it finished soon. But in fact, it took 6 years even to have a test release. And it still doesn't work well enough, although people are making progress on it. Well, that's unfortunate. It isn't, at least as of yet, it's not a success. But you know, we've launched development of hundreds of programs, and nobody succeeds every time. In any case, it was not a disaster because the GNU system is a success. And the reason is that in 1991, a Finnish college student wrote his own kernel. He used the usual monolithic design, and he got it to barely work in less than a year. That kernel is called Linux, and initially it was not free software, because when Linux was first released, its license was too restrictive. It prohibited commercial distribution, and that's not acceptable. You see, in order for something to be free software, the 4 freedoms have to be available to any kind of user in any area of life, and that includes business. However, in 1992, Torvalds changed the license of Linux. He adopted the GNU General Public License, or GNU GPL, which is the most often used free software license. It's not the only one. There are lots of free software licenses. But I better explain what that means. What is a free software license anyway? Well, how can a program be free software? Under today's copyright law, anything that's written is automatically, immediately copyrighted. You don't even have a choice. And copyright law, by default, prohibits people from copying, distributing, and modifying the program, and in many countries prohibits them from running it too. So how can a program be free software? The only way to legally make it free is with a formal declaration by the copyright holder giving everybody the 4 freedoms. Well, that makes it free software. So that declaration we call a free software license. So there are many ways to write it and still do the job. As long as it adequately gives people all 4 of these freedoms, it's a free software license. The GNU GPL is just one of them. But over 2/3 of all free software packages use it. What makes the GNU GPL special is that it was that I wrote it to serve the goals of the free software movement. I had already seen, because there were a few free programs back in 1983, I had seen how it was possible for one person to release a free program and somebody else would modify it and distribute that as a proprietary program. So then the users would get it, but they would not get freedom. Well, since the goal of developing GNU was to give everybody freedom, I needed to stop that from happening. So I designed this license to stop that. And I invented a legal technique called copyleft, which is the method of stopping that. Copyleft says, when you redistribute this program, whether you have changed it or not, you must redistribute it under the same license, and you must provide the source code. And in general, it says, when you redistribute, you must respect the freedom of the next person, just as we respected your freedom. So you must pass along the freedom. So copyleft is a requirement that says the middleman is not allowed to strip away the freedom and pass on the code as proprietary software. So there are copyleft free software licenses and there are non-copyleft free software licenses. Both of them respect your freedom. The copyleft licenses go even further and they actively defend the freedom of every user. So, when Torvalds re-released Linux under the GNU GPL, it became free software. And thus, the combination of the almost complete GNU system and the kernel Linux was a complete free operating system. The first free operating system for modern computers. For the first time, it was possible to buy a PC and run it in freedom. There had been other free operating systems like in 1970. And I was working on one even during the 70s, but that was in one little place, which was very unusual. Ignore it. So, the release of Linux as free software was an important contribution to the free software community. It was the step that carried us across the finish line. Before that, we had most of a free operating system, and lots of those components were useful, but you needed to have another operating system to run them on, and that had to be proprietary. After the last missing piece was filled in, we had a complete free operating system, and you could buy a PC, install the free system, and run it in freedom. However, the people who combined Linux, the kernel, with the not quite complete GNU system, made a mistake. They started calling it a Linux system, essentially focusing all their attention on one component and ignoring all the rest that we had been developing for most of a decade. And that's how it happened that millions of people use this variant of the GNU system, and they don't know that it's a variant of the GNU system. They think it's Linux, and they think it was all started by Mr. Torvalds in 1991, and they think it all comes from his views and his vision of life. And what are those views? Torvalds has never agreed with our ideas of freedom. He says he's against it. He says he thinks it's ridiculous that users deserve freedom. Well, he has a right to his views, but he doesn't have a right to use the credit for the tremendous job that we did for your freedom before he even got involved. He doesn't have the right to get the credit for that and use it to promote his views as if he had done with that. And it's not just a matter of what's his rights or our rights, it's your rights that really matter. because it's not just unfair to us, thousands of us in the GNU project, not to give us a share of the credit, but it also encourages people to mindlessly adopt his views. And what happens when they do that? They don't think about freedom at all, they don't value their own freedom, and then they lose it by failure to pay attention. And that's dangerous for everybody. So, it's vital to inform people that this system is the GNU plus Linux operating system, the GNU/Linux operating system. We only ask for equal mention, but if you give us equal mention, people will realize that Torvalds did not start at all, that this was an operating system that exists because the GNU project cares about freedom. This operating system was developed so you can have freedom. Other operating systems have been developed for technical motives or commercial motives. This system was developed for the sake of your freedom. And this is what people must know. Because so often, people who love the system and promote the use of the system have never even heard that it exists for their freedom. And they think it's Linux. And when they see articles from the GNU project explaining our ideas of freedom, the same ideas I told you today, they say, oh, why should I even read that? That has nothing to do with me. I'm a Linux user. And those ideas, those come from these fanatics in the GNU project who wrote a few programs that by accident turned out to be useful in the Linux system. That's what they believe. With this misleading name comes a false picture of the history of the system, how it was developed, who developed it, and why. And that false picture is worse than a mere mistake because it systematically encourages people not to care about freedom. If they think the system is Linux, they think it was all started by Torvalds, they say, oh, Torvalds, we have to follow you. And where does he lead them? He doesn't lead them to defend their own freedom or even to think that they deserve any freedom. And that puts freedom in danger for all of us, because with fewer of us to defend it, our chances of winning are smaller. So for the sake of our freedom, we need to teach other people to think about the issue. Consider that freedom is frequently threatened. And if you don't defend it, you'll probably lose it soon. And politicians have all sorts of excuses to take away our freedom. They usually say they're protecting us from something. But most of the measures they take to supposedly protect us really have nothing to do with that. They don't try to justify why we have to take away this freedom, why it wouldn't be possible to protect us and respect this freedom. That question they avoid because they don't have an answer for it. So we have to be prepared to defend our freedom. But in order to defend our freedom, we have to value it. And in order to value it, we have to understand the concept. Now, in other areas of life, the debate over human rights has gone on for centuries. Plenty of time to reach conclusions about what human rights people are entitled to and spread them around the world. Now, that doesn't mean we always succeed in defending them. As you can see in the past, in recent years, in the US and in India, human rights, and many other countries, often under the influence of Bush, human rights have been taken away. But at least it gives us a base to try. So, well, that's better than nothing. But computing is a new area of life. It's only been 15 years or so that even in a few advanced countries, most people use computers. And in the rest of the world, it's less or not even yet. Well, that's a short time for a debate over what human rights a person deserves as the user of a program. even if society tried to have a debate. But mostly it hasn't tried, because just about everybody started using computers with proprietary software, and everyone else they knew was using proprietary software. So they took for granted that proprietary software is normal and legitimate. And they allowed the developers of that proprietary software to dictate the answer. What human rights do you deserve as the user of a program? And they dictated a it's the GNU system, they think it's Linux, and they think it all was started by Mr. Torvalds. And the other is, they don't even hear the term free software. They have most people use a different term, quote, open source, unquote. And there's a reason, because these two terms are associated with totally different philosophical values. As you have seen, the free software movement is based on values of freedom and community, ethical values, and we present this as an ethical issue. We say that it's right to respect other people's freedom and wrong to trample it. Proprietary software is an injustice. The people who talk about open source, they never say anything like that. They're not just changing a couple of words, they're saying something different. They only refer to practical convenience values. They say that they want powerful, reliable software. They don't say that there are freedoms that it's wrong to take away from other people. They don't present this as a choice between right and wrong. They avoid that, and that's why many